Are you curious about how Capstone Leadership Solutions can help your small healthcare organization to improve and grow with more speed and ease? If so, reach out to us at capstoneleadership.net. There's a contact us page, or you can email us at info@capstoneleadership.net. We're here to help. People could be very competent, but not consistent. People also could be very consistent. So they might be very consistent and giving feedback all the time. Using that example of a leadership practice, they could be giving feedback all the time, but not be very competent at it. And so we want both. I am an and person. We want people to be competent and consistent. Both are important in greatness.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage.
Glad to be back with another episode of Culture Change RX. And this is Sue here in the studio today, all by myself for this solo episode on a topic related to culture change. And today's focus is on the subjects of competency and consistency. So I mentioned this back just a couple episodes ago on episode 68 that I wanted to follow up on this idea that culture change is the long game. And one of the topics related to the continuous efforts of positive culture change and continual improvement of culture is this idea of competency versus consistency. And we really need both competency and consistency, and they are different. And let's unpack this as to what it means related to cultural competency as it relates to thriving and amazing organizations with great cultures. So going back to this definition or this concept that what is culture? Culture is this is how we do things around here. So you can imagine that competency is this is how we do things around here in ways that are considered to be competent. And consistency is this is how we do things around here in ways that are consistent and that we can count on. So we can count on the competency of it and we can count on the consistency of it. This is how we do things around here. So competency is more related to the quality or the how of the practice or the standard work or the behavior. So this is how we behave, this is how we perform, and this is the definition of the quality, the how that make up the competency of it. And that consistency is about the how often or the when, the frequency. So whether it's the behaviors that we set high standards for, whether it's a standard of practice that we set high standards for, we need to be both competent, the quality, and the how, and consistent in the frequency or the when or the how often. So this would apply to all sorts of things like behaviors and standards. And in our work, we talk a lot about bundles. So having bundles of leadership practices or our leadership bundle or leadership standard work. This is how we lead around here. It could be related to nursing care in healthcare organizations. This is how we nurse around here. So it could be your nursing bundle and your collections of standard work for nursing care across all nursing units in an organization. In organizations that we work with, their patient experience teams introduces and brings and keeps alive 12 positive communication standards, which is really a service and quality bundle for all employees to embrace. And then the employee experience team and leaders collectively work to elevate the standards of behavior in the organization. So there's a set standards of behavior. This is how we treat each other. This is how we treat patients and family and visitors, etc. This is how we behave around here. So when we're an organization that establishes these kind of practices, these kind of standards, these kind of bundles, once we've defined them, we need to bring and keep them alive, which is really building the competency and consistency of everyone in the organization so that it does become this is how we do things around here. And you've probably heard us say this on the podcast before too, that training isn't one and done. And it's also going to take more than training. So it's going to take training and retraining, but it's going to take some other things too. Training isn't the only answer to elevating competency and elevating consistency. So I want to unpack this a little bit for you by again talking about the differences between elevating competency and elevating consistency. And again, we need both. So let's start with competency. So competency really is the quality of the practice, the how of the practice or the behavior. And before we can say that an individual or a whole group of individuals are competent in that practice or competent in that standard and living that standard, we first have to define what it means to be competent in it. So what is our standard? What is our standard work? So these need to be clearly defined so that we can then engage in the efforts to elevate competency in keeping with that defined standard. So this is where clear is really helpful and kind, is to make sure that the standard is clearly defined. So if we say we have these 9 practices that are part of our leadership bundle, we need to clearly define each one of those practices. How do we define how we do that practice? So policies, procedures, standard operating procedures, standard work being clearly defined for leaders. Nursing. So the nursing bundle, each one of the practices in it, whether it's purposeful hourly rounding, what does it mean to be competent? What is the standard? What are we striving as far as the quality of how we do hourly rounding, for example? So the pathway to competency for an individual and an entire team and organization starts with defining clearly what is the practice? What is the how? What defines the quality of this practice or this standard? And then once we have it defined, we can start the process of helping individuals and collectively all the people to become more competent in the practice. And when it comes to competency, not just knowing the how of it, the details of what it means to be high quality in achieving this practice and being competent in this practice, training is aided when people understand why. Why do we even need this practice? And that they are inspired and become willing to gain competency in this practice because they don't just understand the how of it that's being taught, but they understand the why of it. So it's really about being equipped and inspired to be high quality in the practice, to gain competency in the practice. If they really aren't inspired by the why or understanding of the why, becoming competent in the practice can seem more transactional, right? That they're going through the motions and yes, they might be doing it correctly or properly, but they're not really doing it with purpose and heart. And they're really not into it, right? They're doing it, but they're not really into it. And therefore, they may not be extremely motivated to be competent in the practice or to stay competent in the practice. And engaging in the practice isn't giving them a lot of joy. We'll talk about that with consistency too, how important that is. But definitely with competency, for people to be inspired and motivated and willing to learn to do things a new, better way, to become competent in the new, better way, to understand the how and the why, and to integrate that into their daily work and their practice, they do need to know the how and it be clearly defined and the why. And so when we're focused as an organization, whether we're a team that's helping others to become more competent in this, whether we're a leader helping others to become more competent in individual practices, we really will be using tactics related to training, mentoring, and coaching around the how and the why. And that's going to help elevate competency. And when people are struggling with competency, then we're helping them to identify their learning gaps and to fill those learning gaps. Gaining competency is really activities and tactics around training, mentoring, coaching, identifying and filling learning gaps. And that's in both the how of the practice and then pairing that with the why so people are willing and inspired and get joy out of the practice. So that's competency. That's efforts of an entire organization or entire team and each individual to set and achieve competency in a practice or a standard. So this is how we behave around here. This is how we perform around here. And this is what it means to be competent in it. This is the how and the why. We train, we mentor, we coach, we identify, and we fill learning gaps. Now let's shift to consistency because it's not exactly the same. So when we want to elevate consistency in the practice, we're really talking about the quantity or the frequency or the when or the how often of the practice. So again, just like with competency, we also need to define what it means to be consistent. So when should we use the practice? How often should we engage in this practice? What is the minimum of how often or the frequency of utilizing this tactic? So you could imagine that certain people might be competent in a practice. They know how to do it perfectly and they can do it perfectly every time they do it, but they don't do it all of the time or in all of the scenarios when they should do it, or they don't do it to the frequency that would give the optimal results. So, an example might be the leadership practice of giving and receiving feedback. So, a leader might be very competent and skilled and able to give, whether it's compliments, call outs, coaching, or correction. They might be extremely competent in the skill of it. They might know how to do it and be able to demonstrate that they can indeed do it. But they don't do it as often as they could or should, or in all of the scenarios when it would benefit the individual or the team or the outcome. So being competent is only one part of the equation. We need to do it in the proper quantity, frequency, the proper situations in order to get the optimal results from that actual practice or standard. So again, the individuals that are subject to these standards, subject to these practices should be living and practicing these practices and standards. They need to know the details of the quantity, the frequency, the when. And again, they also need to know why that quantity or frequency is important. And again, why the practice itself is important. Again, they need to be inspired and willing to, in that example of feedback, give high quality, competent feedback as often as required or optimal. And if they're not really inspired by the why around the practice, the why around the frequency or the quantity of the practice, again, they might approach it as a transactional or a checking the box kind of task versus really an important, powerful tactic or practice. So again, you want people engaging in the quantity and the frequency with purpose and heart as well. Really inspired by the why and being willing to be consistent with the practice. So I mentioned with competency, as teams and leaders, we're really focused on training, mentoring, and coaching tactics and identifying and filling learning gaps as a way to elevate competency. And it's a little different when it comes to elevating consistency and our approach that we take as teams and leaders to elevate consistency. It's a little bit different. Training isn't likely going to be the answer. So, how can we track quantity and frequency and hold people accountable to the quantity and the frequency? And when it comes to consistency, we're really looking to identify and remove barriers and to also promote great new habits. So that might involve habit hacks, like really understanding how people create new habits, how they integrate new behaviors or new practices into their daily work. It may not be a training answer. It's definitely an identifying and removing barriers answer and creating new habits answer. So in competency, we're really validating the practice and we're assessing the competency and the how through things like observation, simulation, demonstration, data, etc., so we can validate. But when it comes to consistency, we're likely tracking quality and frequency. So trust but verify. So we might need to do this through tracking logs and spot checks. And so what I'm really offering up to leaders and improvement teams is a new way of looking at this idea of the long game, right? What is the long-term effort by an entire organization and its leaders and its improvement teams to elevate the competency and the consistency of each person and collectively everyone around our high standards for how we behave around here and how we perform around here? And that it takes both training, mentoring, and coaching tactics, primarily focused on elevating competency, and accountability tactics, primarily focused on elevating consistency of practice. And when we have our sights in always getting better results, and we're looking at our opportunities, we need to look at both our opportunities and our approach related to competency and consistency. Because again, people could be very competent, but not consistent. People also could be very consistent. So they might be very consistent and giving feedback all the time. Using that example of a leadership practice, they could be giving feedback all the time, but not be very competent at it. And so we want both. I am an and person. We want people to be competent and consistent. Both are important in greatness and continually going from good to great, great to even greater. And for really achieving, this is how we do things around here. And when we're looking at our data where we see that we could optimize, we could get even better results, we have to look at, is it in the area of elevating competency? We need retraining, more coaching, more mentoring. We need to identify and fill the learning gaps. And or is it in the area of consistency where we need people to be able to increase the quantity, achieve the desired frequency, and or engage in the practice when the situation calls for it, every time the situation calls for it. So the how and the how often both are important in the long game. At Capstone Leadership Solutions, we absolutely delight in working with entire organizations, their entire leadership team, their designated teams that are part of their initiatives improvement structure. And we love helping them to grasp these concepts of competency and consistency as they lead the efforts in their organization to continually grow and improve over time with more ease and speed. If your organization is needing to elevate, this is how we do things around here, in your leadership practices, in your clinical practices, in your service excellence practices, and then being able to leverage that for ease and speed of future growth and changes, we are your people. We are likely your people if you are struggling with this. It is what we do. It is our superpower here at Capstone Leadership Solutions. And we love jumping on the phone with executive teams who are looking to move their organizations from good to great, great to even greater. That is what we do at Capstone Leadership Solutions. And if you're an executive on a healthcare executive team, in particular with a small and rural healthcare organization, we'd love to chat with you about how this is going where you are and how we could maybe help. At our website, capstoneleadership.net, there is a contact us page. You can book a call. It is a free complimentary consultation call. It could be with you as an executive or your entire executive team. It will be a great investment of 45 minutes or an hour of your time. And we absolutely love meeting the healthcare executives out there that are every day leading the mission and visions of their organizations. So again, capstoneleadership.net. That contact us page, you can book a call right there. Thanks for listening. And if you found this episode helpful in even a small way, and you know anyone else out there in the world of healthcare leadership or leading improvement teams and healthcare organizations that could benefit from understanding more about competency and consistency of practice and high standards, please share this. We'd appreciate that. And we'll see you next week on another episode of Culture Change RX.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.